Hi, everybody. Hope you're doing okay. Hopefully you've seen that your grades have been updated. A lot of you have been really good about checking that and making sure that I haven't made any mistakes. Um, what I want to talk about today is a couple of different things. First of all, you've all submitted your initial CEJs, and hopefully you took the time to look over more than just one person's that you critiqued, because some of you have done a very, very fine job on your CEJs, and then some of you were just too general. And what I mean by that is that some of you are able to basically use the terminology without saying anything. And what I want you to become or develop is that ability to be critical and to really use specific information that you've been able to acquire from both watching the video, gathering the data, analyzing the data. And so with the last presentation, one of the things you were asked to do was to basically develop a table. And what that table did was it looked at the four conditions that are key in natural selection, which, by evolution by natural selection. And those four key components were aspects that you're going to use in your justification. And unless you are able to be specific, I don't really know if you understand them or not. So I'm going to take a little bit more time today to kind of go through what we were looking for specifically on that table, because then when you're given some new data sets, you're being asked to then take what you can get from those data sets after you calculated some things, and then you'll be able to apply from three various figures more information to that data table. And so you'll be able to add things to the various components under your evidence. And then that ultimately is what you're going to be using in your final CEJ. So let's take a look at what we've got here. So if you'll notice under our daily goals, it says develop an explanation for a case of evolution by natural selection that includes logic and evidence, linking the claims to evidence through scientific reasoning. So you're not just going to babble out a number of phrases with regard to definitions such as, oh, with natural selection, we know things will become more fit. What does that mean in terms of the pocket mice? You need to be specific. So if we look at the second goal, when you summarize and you analyze and describe the evidence needed to make claims about the natural selection, you're not just doing it in general, you're going to be very specific with regard to the rock pocket mouse, okay? Everything you talk about, you want to bring in what you've learned about that rock pocket mouse. Be as specific as you possibly can. So our agenda today is to develop an explanation for the mouse fur color. You're basically going to complete number 6s through 10, and then you're going to revise your CEJ. And your CEJ, like I said, has to have more specific evidence, not as general as some of your CEJs were before. And then you're just going to submit your revised CEJ. Now note, at the end of this PowerPoint presentation, you're going to find there's a rubric. And if you follow that rubric, if when you look, okay, what does it take for me to get a perfect score on this first part? You need to make sure you've done everything. It's interesting how when we were grading your number 9 that you had gave you a rubric that was super specific. And if you did exactly what it said, you got a perfect score. And some of you, it's real interesting, you forget. I mean, I wish when I was growing up they used rubrics, because rubrics are a fail-safe system. You go back and check to make sure you've got everything on the rubric, you're good to go. So use the rubric. It's there to help you. It's amazing how so many of you like bypass things. Anyways, let's get going here. All right, let's get started first by kind of giving you a quick little review. I'm going to ask you to stop the video in just a second here. And I want you to see how much you really understand those components, those conditions that we were talking about before, that were in that table previously without going back and looking at it. So you've got your notebook out, right? And so what it's asking you in this slide to do is to take two of these conditions of natural selection, either variation, inheritance, differentiation, survival, and reproduction, or adaptation. Choose two of them. And then do a list, write, or draw, making connections between the two. Stop this video for a second, for a few minutes, to see if you're able to do that. If you're not, go back to the previous PowerPoint to make sure you understand what those various conditions actually mean. So go ahead and stop this video, do that little assignment, give yourself about 5-10 minutes to see if you really, really understand it. Otherwise, it's going to get more challenging because we're going to build on that concept, okay? All right, so stop and then come back. Okay, so hopefully you're back now. And so you've done that and you've gone through. So let's take a look at what that previous thing had to do. This is a very small version, so hopefully you have a bigger version. But you can see the conditions that we're talking about. Now, this is a table that's key for your CEJs because it focuses in on the evidence for each major condition for evolution by natural selection. And so when you are writing your CEJ and you pop that evidence graph up there and you analyze it, when you go to write your justification, what scientific concepts are you talking about? What conditions is your evidence being supported by? Is it being supported by variation? Well, how would you know that? Well, if you found, for instance, if you look under the evidence part there, that there were black rock pocket mice and tan rock pocket mice, and they belong to the same species. So you found both of them there. Right off of that, you go, oh, that's variation, okay? Same species, but they're variation. That is justification component, okay? So if you find that there's more than one type, which wasn't always the case at every location, but at a number of locations, variation did exist, okay? And the key part here is they're the same species, okay? But let's look at inheritance, all right? So then what you discovered was that the gene that we were analyzing in those pocket mice, they went down specifically and told you which one of those genes are. Well, most of the genes are completely identical. And so when you looked at the genetic information, you found that most of the genes, as the video is telling you, are completely identical. But there's just one difference, okay? The pocket mice differ in just one gene part, okay? So the majority of the genes are identical, but there was one part. And so that inheritance, which they would have gotten obviously passed down from the parent to the offspring, that's an inheritance component, okay? We know that when you looked at the MCR1, that was the gene that actually was controlling what the fur color was. Now, it was interesting how so many of you were saying that it was a couple of you in your CEJs were talking about it being the color of their skin. No, it's not. It's fur. It's their fur. It's their hair. Because remember, it's making a protein. It's those proteins that it's making. And if it's different in those alleles, which you're going to see, then it was more likely going to be dark, or if it was more likely going to be lighter, okay? And I know you guys have studied alleles, so I'll give you a small little review at one point here. And then, of course, then we go on to talk about differential survival or reproduction. Bottom line is here, is that, and this is really interesting, a lot of you wanted to tell me that the mice chose a location. They don't choose. They came to live in that location. And if they get picked off, then oops, unfortunately, their parents didn't give them the right genotype to get the right phenotype. The mouse doesn't choose its location. Its genetic information is what's going to give it either the adaptability that's advantageous or not. And if it's not advantageous and they don't have other skills, they're going to get eaten. That's the bottom line. So it's amazing how many of you want to tell me that the mice wanted to choose. The mice don't choose, okay? It's a hard kind of concept to grasp, but it's whatever they have when they get there, okay? Adaptation then, you found that there were specific situations for survival. In other words, a survival advantage of 10% would cause the same change in population only 100 years. If you did the math, which some of you actually did do in your initial CEJ, you were able to tell me what was going to happen in 100 years from now. Most of you were able to tell me what they started off with and how they resulted. And that's fine. That was totally fine, okay? So the bottom line is, we're introducing those ideas or those conditions that are used for evolution by natural selection. You're going to use these conditions today. As we go through and analyze a couple of different figures, you're going to be analyzing those figures, and that's going to be more data that you will then add to your evidence board. Why? Because it's going to support or negate what your graphs are telling you that you've already figured out, okay? So here's two pieces of information. We're going to stop the video here in a second here. You need to make sure that you download both the student handout and the additional evidence graphs. These graphs are new this time around, so you want to download those or just get the other piece of paper out. So go ahead and stop the video for a moment to go ahead and get those things together for you. So what you can see on number 7 on the handout is there's a chart in there. And what I made sure is that I've highlighted that in this case, they're asking you to calculate the percentage of the tan mice, okay, in each population in data table 1. So they're specifically saying just the tan. Well, if you look, those are the various locations, Christmas Passage all the way to O'Neill Pass, okay? And they're telling you what the soil color was, the number of tan mice, and then the number of dark mice. Well, you need to know both because you need to know what the total number of mice were, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to figure out what percentage of tan mice there were. You can't do a percentage without having a total, right? And so you can see here where you've been given, this is the number of tan mice that were found at Christmas Pass. The number of dark mice is 0. So when you add those two together, you obviously are going to get 6. And then when you go to do the percentage, you're going to say, okay, well 6, which was the tan mice, divided by the total, which is 6, is going to give you 1. Well, 1 is 100%, right? Okay. And you're going to do the same thing for all of these. Now, I went ahead and gave you another example of one of the observations that you would have made at Lava West, where here there were no tan mice. There were 7 dark. Therefore, 0 plus 7 gives you 7, right? And 0 divided by 7 is going to give you 0. So the percentage of tan mice was 0. Now it's asking you here which populations, so they're looking at the various locations, show evidence of variation in fur color. Okay, which ones show variation? Think back to what I just got to saying a couple of slides back, okay? Add the evidence to your evolution by natural selection data table. So that data table we were just looking at, go to that part that dealt with variation and add some more data to it. Add some more analysis. Add some more supporting information, some evidence that you're going to be able to use. And then for section C, describe how the evidence you collected relates to one or more of the major principles, meaning those 4 conditions from the chart. So look to see if there's any other place that this information would be important to. Okay. Again, stop, go back, finish calculating all the values, and then go back and add these to that chart. Okay. This is the chart I'm talking about, right? So you're going to add it to these charts right here, okay? All right. Okay, so then once you come back, we're going to now look at a couple of different new data sets that you're going to add to your information, okay? What is an allele? Well, if you recall, remember how you receive your chromosomes from your parents. one from your mom, one from your dad. That's where you have two alleles, okay? And so we can see here, this would be chromosome 1, chromosome 2. I'm gonna get my mouse to work here. Here we go. All right, so we know that genes are your DNA, which code for proteins that get passed on to the offspring. Alleles are different versions or alternative forms of that gene. For example, MC1R gene codes for a protein that determines the fur or the hair color. And it's really interesting because you're going to find out, you think it's only for mice. It's not. It's truly amazing. Some information we'll get to in just a little bit here. So we can see that there are two versions. You have allele 1 and allele 2. I went ahead and just gave you just kind of a reminder in case you kind of remember. Remember how you'd have chromosomes, right? And then this would be allele 1, and it's showing you here what the dominant would look like, but they're in the exact same location. So maybe one of these came from your mom, one of these came from your dad. And then depending upon what you actually got, because this is just giving you an idea of what it could be, if you received this, then you would have had a heterogeneous mix, okay, of those alleles that have that genetic information on it. So you would be possibly a carrier of whatever allele 2 is, okay? And so this is just a reminder. This is not specific to our actual activity here. I was just trying to remind you, you probably remember terms homogynous, meaning the fact that you would have had both of the alleles that were identical to each other. In this case, it would be homogeneous in terms of dominant. Over here, you have another homogeneous, only this would be a recessive. These here are scenarios where you have a mix. So if we look at this figure 3, it says the relationship of the genotype of rock pocket mice for MC1R gene and fur color. A higher value for reflectance means lighter fur, okay? So this is saying the percentage of reflectance, that's the amount of reflectivity. Well, if you remember, the lower value of reflectance means darker fur, meaning darker colors absorb while lighter colors reflect, right? So if you take a look at this situation here, are you able to determine which must be the darker fur and which one must be the lighter fur? Go ahead and stop, go back and add anything that you can to your table. So now when we look at what pattern or patterns do you see on the graph in figure 3, what I want you to think of is making a claim about whether the differences in fur color are inherited. And if so, support your claim with evidence from figure 3. So what must be the case? Add the evidence to your evolution by the natural selection table, okay, as we said. So you're adding things to it as much as you possibly can. And then you're always keeping in mind that describe how the evidence relates to those 4 major conditions. Are we dealing about variation? Are we dealing about adaptation? Which component are we dealing with? Of those 4, right? Are we talking about variation? Are we talking about inheritance? Well, this is specifically asking you inherited. So obviously this would be inheritance, right? Okay. But maybe there's something that could add or that you could place somewhere else. Stop and think about it and then go ahead and add to it. So now we're going to look at figure 4. Here we're asking you to make a claim about whether the frequency of the alleles that affect fur color are different in populations on light or dark backgrounds. Many of you wanted to tell me that the mice were dark because their location was dark. Which came first? Okay, was the presence of having an allele for dark colored hair present before the lava flows? Go back and listen to the video if you're not too sure about that, okay? So you're going to make a claim about whether the frequency of the alleles that affect the fur color are different in populations on light or dark backgrounds. Support your claim with evidence from figure 4. So take a moment to stop the video here, analyze what this is asking you to do. Now, if you'll notice, it's only dealing with allele 2. So you have to go back and look at figure 3 and go, okay, well, what was meant by allele 2? Was it doing a lot of reflectivity? If it's doing a lot of reflectivity, that would imply it's lighter. Was it doing very much reflectivity? That would mean it was darker. Okay, so then which one of those alleles were which? And then here we're talking just about allele 2. And so now it's saying the genotype of the rock pocket mice for the MC1 gene is different when the main background color of the environment changes. So you'll take a look at this and you'll see if you can better understand with respect to the various locations which they're making reference to as being populations. Again, once you come up with information here, you're saying to yourself, now we've specifically have said population, and we're asking you about the frequency, okay, whether the frequency of the alleles. So you have to stop and think, okay, we're talking about alleles. Is that variation? Is that going to be inheritance? Is that going to be differential survival or reproduction? Is that adaptation? Could you come up with something that would be possibly added into one of those? Again, what can you add to your already table that you have? Stop, analyze, answer the questions, and add it to your table. So then finally here, a little bit of reflection. You're going to review your answer to number 2A after watching the video and analyzing additional evidence. Describe the number of conditions for natural selection you used in your initial answer. In all honesty, you should be able to use all 4 of them. Also, describe the changes you would make to your answer based on what you've learned. Pretty much a majority of you are going to need to change your CEJs. Not completely, but you need to fine-tune them. You need to figure out what belongs where. Which part of this is actually justification and which part of this is evidence. And does your evidence actually support what your final claim says? So many of you are a little bit all over the place, at least in terms of the evidence and justification, which has always been the most difficult part. But keep in mind that justification is the scientific concepts. Which ones play a role? So you're going to use this new information, you're going to revise your CEJ, you're then going to upload it for me to grade, okay? Before you do that, take a look, okay? What's the guiding question? What factors cause the differences in the fur color in the population of rock pocket mice? Okay? Answer that guiding question. So what is your actual answer? What factors cause the differences in the fur color in the population of rock pocket mice, okay? Your evidence, it consists of analysis of the data you collected and interpretation of that analysis. Many of you are doing a really good job of bringing in that interpretation. Here's where the challenging part's going to be with the justification. But I kind of gave you a little bit of hint because I'm trying to let you to realize this is where your conditions are going to come in, okay? Because that's going to be your scientific justification. So your connection to the scientific concepts, well, that's where you're going to say, when you're looking at, for instance, adaptation with the rocket pocket mice, blah, 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 blah. And if you look at my graph, you would see that such and such and such is showing blah, 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 blah. So you just got to be as clear as you possibly can. Don't be very general, be really specific, okay? So here is an excellent CEJ. Make sure you are following it, okay? If you're looking for perfect scores, then you need to make sure that this is what you have for every single thing, okay? All right, that should be it. Don't forget, you just have to do these parts. It is really helpful if you type it up. If you have to handwrite it, please do it in pen and make sure it's dark so I can read it. Some of you might find yourself having to write it more than once because when you go to scribble and you go to change, it's a little bit challenging to read. And you're going to find yourself adding more information. So you might find yourself doing this more than once, but you should be able to get it all done, okay? Keeping in mind that this is going to be due Wednesday night, okay? All right, thank you so much, everybody. Let me go ahead and stop recording here. Have yourself a great day, and I'll see you if you need any questions. I'll see you at office hours on Wednesday between, I think, 3 and 3:30. See you then. Bye-bye.